Welcome back. I've got another vintage lens review for you today, and it's the Minolta 50mm F1.7. This is one of the most common lenses found on Minolta lenses with the autofocus system, and this particular lens was released way back in 1985. One of the reasons you'll find so many of these lenses around is because it was the standard lens which was bundled with the bodies back in the mid-80s, and there is a restyled version which came out around about 1990, which replaced the plastic focus ring with a rubber one. Just to give you a physical tour of the lens, we have the traditional coating of the era, which is a deep purple. That's the Minolta achromatic coating, as they call it. The filter doesn't rotate on this lens when you are focusing, that is either manually or in autofocus, but obviously the front ring does. That's why they made it small in this era, was to ensure that you didn't actually touch the focus ring when it was focusing. Now, interesting design with this and some of the other Minolta primes of the time is that you have a built-in lens hood. It extends just under a centimetre. True to say that it's not the most effective hood because it's not that big, but at least there's nothing to lose with this because it's built into the lens itself. Build quality is very good with high quality dense plastics, the sort that you don't see anymore on lenses. The budget primes tend to be quite thin plastic, and you also have the focus distance scale and window. Taking off the lens cap just to show you the lens on the underside, we have a metal mount on this. Once you rotate the focus ring, there's the slot there which engages with the focus motor on the body, so it's driven from the body, which means it's noisier, but then on the other hand there's no motor to fail inside. Aperture is also driven from the body as well, it's a mechanical. There's your 7 aperture blades. They are not rounded, and I do have the original box with this. I've owned it for around about 12 years. It's branded Maxim because this one would have originally been sold in North America, and I'll just show the user guide quickly. These were printed off in 1984, obviously for the first run, so this is one of the original lenses that was released with that. And not that the manual is particularly useful, but it does give you a few ideas on the spec of the other lenses, which I'll just show you there. So it covers a few of the other primes that were available at the time. Just a quick shot showing the box that came in with the styrofoam. I just keep this around because it doesn't particularly bother me with getting a lens that has the box, but this came with it. I got quite a nice sample and it's in very good condition. So just attaching it to the camera, and you'll see the aperture mechanism moving here. That needs to be very quick in reaction, otherwise it could be that the blades are contaminated with oil or grease, and that can sometimes happen with some of these older lenses. So make sure you get a good sample of this. There are a lot of them around, so you can afford to be quite picky. And I'm just showing you the focus now on a smaller body. Generally the focus speeds are quite fast. These are much later bodies that I'm putting it on compared to the original bodies, which would be a lot slower in terms of their focus speed, but you'll get the better result out of a more modern system with this lens. But generally speaking, I've not had any complaints with the focus speed on this, even though obviously you will hear a bit of noise using it. I'm going to run through a few basic tests just to show you performance of the lens. And wide open in the middle, it's actually quite good. At maximum aperture, there's a slight reduction in contrast, and occasionally you can see some veiling haze, but the performance across most of the frame isn't too bad. It does of course improve when you stop the lens down, and there is a very slight amount of pincushion distortion, but you'll be unlikely to ever notice that in real world shooting. Majority of 50mm lenses do have a touch of pincushion. Once you start dropping the aperture down, you'll see that the corners and contrast improve quite a bit, but still, even on a full frame camera at around about f/5.6, you'll be getting up to quite decent levels for the corners and extreme edges. On a crop sensor camera, it gets quite good for around about f/2.8 onwards, and personally it doesn't really match up with the reviews that I've read online. Perhaps I have an exceptionally good copy, but I've always been quite impressed with the lens in terms of sharpness. Now, as far as is it usable real world wide open, the answer is yes. Again, you can sometimes get that slight veiling haze, but generally speaking the resolution of the lens is good right from the maximum aperture. Once you drop it down a little bit to f2, you'll see the contrast pick up. Looking at the blur quality of the lens, particularly with the background, it generally does a pretty good job. There can sometimes be some outlining on highlight areas, but it is quite smooth, and that's unusual for a 50mm lens from this era if I compare it to other brands that I've used. You can get some chromatic aberration wide open, as you would expect with a fast prime, though I've generally never really had a problem with any extreme fringing on this lens, and generally most of the time I wouldn't have to do any corrections to remove that. But it is something to note wide open. Stopping the lens down, you'll see it still manages to do quite a decent job in the background. You don't have any of that unsightly double edges or blur, but like I said, there is a little bit of outlining on highlight edges that you can see. I don't dislike that myself. I've always been quite fond of the look of this lens and rarely had an issue with shots that I've taken real world that I haven't really liked the blur on the lens. On this shot with the potted plant, you can see focus is near the front at the bottom, and it's quite a smooth transition going from the in to outer focus areas. Again, you can get some slight haze effect for outer focus areas, slightly wide open aperture. Now onto flare, you can sometimes have problems with this because it can be quite strong. Generally speaking though, I haven't had too many problems out and about using it, and I've usually used this lens for people shots. Although you do get closer to the subject, it can give you a different look to your pictures, and I've never been anything but pleased with the results that I've got from it in that regard. Not everyone likes to shoot with a shorter focal length for portraits, but some people do, and I've got some quite good results with this lens. It just means to say you're going to be closer to your subject. Some people prefer to have a longer telephoto lens, say 85mm or longer, but I quite like being able to get close up. Another reason is of course with the lens speed in low light scenarios where you may want to get that extra light in, and that's a common reason for picking this lens. If you are using a cropped body, what I would say is a 35mm would be the better choice for a first lens, because it will give you a similar field of view to this lens on a cropped body, but it is still quite useful for a short telephoto if you are using a cropped body. And this picture demonstrates some of the outer focus highlights and the outlining effect, so it's not super smooth, but I don't dislike the look that I get from this lens. I have tended to use it mainly for people shots, but sometimes out and about I've used the lens too. It's not really an ideal lens for close-up shots because you can't really get that close to the subject. It would be better lenses for that. It's a nice little lens, and this lens goes for around about 35 up to 50 pounds depending on the condition, second hand, and I bought this one off eBay quite a while ago now, and it's even cheaper than it ever was. So an interesting little lens. Hopefully that was useful to you if you were thinking about it, and stay tuned for my next vintage lens review, which will be coming up shortly.